The Ferrari Monza SP2 was worth $2.3 million, and it would not start. 17 engineers, the finest available, had been flown into Charlotte from Atlanta, Nashville, and New York. They had spent 4.5 hours crouched beside it, arguing in low voices about things that did not help. None of them found the answer. The CEO stood 30 feet away, her second glass of sparkling water untouched, and her patience wearing down to something she was working hard not to show. Then a man in a navy work shirt walked through the side service entrance, holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl with 2 braids and sneakers that lit up when she walked. The senior floor director, Gerald Moss, recognized him before anyone else did. The look that crossed Gerald's face in that half-second told the people standing near him something they could not yet put into words. What happened in the next 6 minutes would change the trajectory of the entire evening, and of several careers, and of one small girl's understanding of what her father was worth. Stay with this one. It earns it. The Ferrari Monza SP2 sat at the center of the Meridian Showcase Hall, like an object that had decided to stop cooperating. Its paint was a deep Rosso magma, the kind of red that didn't look red at certain angles, that shifted toward burgundy in warm light and toward something almost black when a shadow crossed it. It was a bespoke 2-seater built for a specific purpose, which was to make every other vehicle in any room feel apologetic for existing. 340 guests had been circling it for the better part of 4 hours, and the circle had grown wider. As the evening went on, the way crowds give ground to things they cannot explain. The engine was silent. It had been silent since 4:18 in the afternoon, when the transport team completed their pre-event setup and the vehicle simply failed to respond to its ignition sequence. No error code that matched any existing documentation. No fault that presented itself in a language the diagnostic equipment understood. In 51 minutes, the most consequential signing ceremony in Radcliffe Motorsport's 31-year history was scheduled to take place beside this car. Margaret Holloway stood near the north wall of the hall, her posture so controlled it looked architectural. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse and held her sparkling water with 2 fingers, the way she held things when she was concentrating on not holding them too tightly. She was 53 years old, the CEO and majority owner of Radcliffe Motorsport, a woman who had inherited a company in moderate decline and turned it into the dominant force in American motorsport distribution through a combination of technical instinct and absolute intolerance for carelessness. Beside her stood Peter Van Holt, 64, Dutch, the lead representative of Crestfield Engineering Group out of Philadelphia, a partnership that had supplied Radcliffe's technical infrastructure for 19 years. Peter had been checking his watch with the discretion of a man who checked it often enough that the gesture had become nearly invisible. He said nothing. He did not need to. The Meridian Showcase Hall was Radcliffe's flagship event space, a converted warehouse in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina, with 22-foot ceilings, polished concrete floors, and a lighting system that cost more than some of the cars it illuminated. The contracts signed in this building over the years had moved significant money. The announcements made here had mattered. Tonight's announcement was supposed to be the largest of them all. A $53 million joint distribution agreement, 3 years in development, contingent on the vehicle, at the center of the room demonstrating the specific capabilities that made it worth every dollar of that valuation. The car had not started. Garrett Stills appeared at Margaret's right shoulder. He was 47, broad. With a silver-streaked beard he kept precisely trimmed and an expression calibrated for situations exactly like this one. He had been in crisis management so long that his resting face had become indistinguishable from his crisis face, which Margaret had always found either reassuring or troubling depending on her mood. "We have a team from the Southeast Ferrari Specialist Network arriving within the hour," he said. "This is going to be resolved." Margaret looked at the car. "You said that 2.5 hours ago. I meant it then, and I mean it now." She did not respond to that. She looked at the Monza. She looked at the 15 men and 2 women kneeling around it in various configurations of professional frustration, and she counted because some she did when she needed her mind to do something useful while her body waited. The first technician had arrived from the authorized Ferrari dealership on South Tryon Street. She had 11 years of mark-specific experience, a diagnostic array worth considerably more than most people's vehicles, and the quiet confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't classify. She spent 47 minutes under the hood. She rose. She wiped her hands. She said that the anomaly presenting on the instrument cluster did not correspond to any firmware behavior documented in the service manuals for this model year or the 2 years preceding it. The second was a powertrain specialist from Atlanta who had worked with Ferrari's North American technical team for 8 years. He attempted a full system reset via the vehicle's OBD-IV interface. Nothing changed. The car sat in its silence the way expensive things sometimes do, patient and completely indifferent. Technicians 3 through 9 arrived across the following 2 hours in a procession that had begun to feel, to the guests who were still pretending to have other conversations, like something between a ritual and an admission. Each brought a different theory: a hydraulic actuator cycling out of tolerance, a pressure differential fault in the fuel delivery manifold, a transmission control module reporting a phantom communication error, a software conflict introduced during the pre-event diagnostic scan itself. Each theory was tested with the appropriate tools and the appropriate seriousness. Each theory dissolved. There is something that happens in rooms full of qualified people that is worth pausing on here, because it matters for what comes next. When a problem resists multiple experts, something begins to calcify inside the group. Each new theory is evaluated not just on its technical merit, but on whether it contradicts the certainty of everyone who came before. The frame around the problem becomes as rigid as the problem itself. The more credentials are present, the harder it becomes for anyone to suggest that the frame is the wrong shape, because suggesting that would mean implying that 17 intelligent people with impressive tools have all been looking in the wrong direction. And nobody wants to be the person who says that out loud. So the room keeps working inside the frame, and the frame keeps producing the same result. I have watched this happen in hospitals, in courtrooms, and in engineering bays in cities across this country. The intelligence of the room does not protect you from this. Sometimes it makes it worse. Keep that in mind. By the time the 12th technician arrived, the guests had abandoned the pretense of looking elsewhere. Conversations near the display floor had thinned to maintenance chatter, the kind of talk people sustain when they are watching something they cannot do anything about and need to fill the silence. The catering staff had begun quietly refilling glasses more often than the pace of the evening required, which was its own form of commentary. Garrett circled the vehicle every 20 minutes. He would approach, lean in slightly, observe something specific, and then step back. He never touched anything. He never directed anyone to a new approach. He circled and he stepped back, and somewhere in the 7th or 8th circuit of this ritual, a young woman named Elise Drummond noticed the pattern. Elise was 26, 8 months into her role as Margaret's technical operations coordinator, hired directly from her graduate program at NC State. She had a quality that was hard to name and easy to recognize. She noticed things before she understood them. She had been sitting at a portable workstation near the south wall of the hall, with a diagnostic log open on her tablet, and she had been watching Garrett circle the car with the attentiveness of someone watching a behavior that doesn't quite make sense. She had also been building a list. Every theory proposed, every component examined, every avenue tried and exhausted. There was one category at the bottom of her list that no one had touched. She had added it 2 hours ago because the error pattern suggested it. But she was new, and she wasn't certain, and she hadn't said anything. She was still thinking about that when the side service door opened. The man who walked in was lean and not particularly tall, a black man in his early 30s wearing a plain navy work shirt, dark work trousers, and leather boots that had been well maintained for a long time. His face was the kind of face that was easy to look at and easy to look past, composed and unhurried, carrying the expression of someone thinking about something that was slightly ahead of him. He had a compact canvas tool bag over one shoulder, and with his other hand he held the hand of a small girl. The girl was 6 years old. She had 2 braids tied off, with small orange elastics, and she was wearing sneakers with tiny lights embedded in the soles that flashed blue and white when she walked. She was holding a small die-cast model car in her free hand, red, roughly the same shade as the Monza, the kind of toy sold in museum gift shops and airport newsstands. She held it against her side, the way children carry things they have decided are important. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 31 years old. He had taken contract work for the logistics team responsible for transporting and staging the event vehicles, a job that paid $42.80 an hour and required no conversation about who he had been before he needed it. His pre-event responsibilities had concluded before the gala opened. He had stayed because the finance coordinator for the event, a man named Phillips who was supposedly somewhere on the second floor, had not returned 3 separate phone calls regarding the signature required to release his payment confirmation. He was not supposed to be on the main floor. That was about to become relevant. The girl, whose name was Cora, was 6. Her mother, Denise, had died 22 months ago. A brain aneurysm, fast and without warning, the kind of death that doesn't give you time to prepare the people around you. The neighbor who normally watched Cora on evenings like this had called Marcus at 2:30 that afternoon, with a migraine that had taken out her vision on one side, and her apology had been genuine enough that he hadn't made it harder than it needed to be. He had brought Cora with him the same way he had brought her to job sites before, quietly, without complaint, without drawing attention to the arrangement. She had a toy car. She had been fine. He had promised her it would be 1 hour. That had been 3.5 hours ago. He guided her to a folding chair near the wall, close to the service entrance, and crouched beside her and told her he'd be back in 10 minutes. She looked at him with the particular expression she had developed over the past 22 months, the one that meant she understood 10 minutes was an approximate figure, and she was choosing to accept it. She said okay and positioned her toy car on her knee. He straightened. He took 3 steps toward the corridor that led to the finance office, and then he saw the Ferrari. More precisely, he saw what was wrong with it. Not the car itself, though he had worked on Monzas before, 2 of them, during a stretch of his life that felt like it belonged to a different person. What he saw was the instrument cluster readout, visible through the driver's side opening, a specific combination of indicator states, and the arrangement of components that had been accessed and closed again. He saw where the work had been concentrated. He saw what had not been touched. He stood still for a moment. His eyes moved across the engine bay with the quiet efficiency of someone reading a page they have read before. Elise Drummond looked up from her tablet. She saw him looking at the car, and she saw the difference between his attention and the attention of the people who had been looking at this car all evening. His was not the look of someone observing a problem. It was the look of someone recognizing one. She glanced at the bottom of her list. She looked back at him. Marcus turned toward the corridor. He had decided in the space of about 4 seconds that the signature was worth exactly 1 more attempt, and then he was leaving regardless. He had taken exactly 2 steps when he heard a voice behind him. Hey, it was not loud. It was the specific not loudness of someone who doesn't need volume to communicate authority. He turned. Garrett Stills was standing 9 feet away, and the expression on his face was doing something complicated. Marcus recognized the architecture of it. He had seen it before, not here, not in this room, but across a different table in a different context 3 years ago. It started with a kind of assessment and arrived somewhere that wore the costume of professional irritation but was made of something else underneath. Who authorized your floor access? Garrett said. Logistics clearance. Service entrance. Marcus held his badge without any particular adjustment to his tone. I'm here to collect a payment confirmation signature from your finance coordinator. This floor is restricted to event personnel and authorized guests. Contract workers don't have access after the event begins. My clearance runs to 9 Lounge. It's 8:37. Garrett turned and said something to the security officer stationed near the corridor entrance. The officer, a large man in a black jacket who moved with the unhurried competence of someone who had done this particular kind of thing, enough times that it required no thought, started across the floor toward Marcus. Marcus did not argue. He took 1 step back, raised both hands slightly, open palms, the body language of a man who has no interest in a scene, and said, I'll go. I just need the signature first. You can get that tomorrow. Garrett's voice had dropped into the register of someone delivering a final answer. The security officer reached him. And here is the moment the evening changed direction. Cora stood up. She didn't call out. She didn't make any sound at all. She simply rose from the folding chair, walked the 12 feet to where her father was standing, and positioned herself at his side with the unhurried certainty of a child who had learned that standing next to her father was always the correct decision. She held her toy car against her chest with both hands and looked up at the security officer with wide, dark eyes that held no fear in them, only the calm of a small person who has learned that the world is often confusing, but her father is not. The security officer stopped, not dramatically, just the particular pause of a large man who has found his momentum interrupted by an unexpected variable. The room had a different weight now. Several guests near the display floor had turned. Peter Van Holt had turned. Elise had risen from her chair. And Margaret Holloway, who had not been watching Garrett or the service entrance but had been watching the Monza, with the focused attention of someone doing arithmetic in their head, caught the sequence in her peripheral vision. She processed it the way she processed most things, not piece by piece but all at once. The navy-shirted man, Garrett's reaction, the small girl moving to stand beside her father, and the specific quality of Garrett's urgency, which was not the urgency of someone managing a policy violation. It was the urgency of someone who needed a particular person out of a particular room. That was the detail that didn't fit. And Margaret Holloway had spent 31 years noticing the details that didn't fit. Marcus put his hand on Cora's shoulder and turned toward the corridor. He had run the math. This was not a fight worth having tonight or any night. He had Cora. He had his tools. He would get the signature by phone, or he would invoice them and follow up through channels. 3 words stopped him. "What do you see?" They came from the direction of the north wall. They were not loud. They were the kind of words that don't need to be loud, because they carry a quality that makes the room stop moving around them. Marcus turned. Margaret Holloway was not looking at him. She was looking at the car. But the question had been directed at him, and they both understood that, and the people around them understood it too. And for a moment, the entire display floor had the particular texture of a room in which everyone has stopped pretending to do anything other than listen. Garrett said, "Ms. Holloway, this individual is a contract laborer. He has no engineering qualifications relevant to the vehicle in question, and his floor access has already been." Margaret raised one hand. It was a small gesture, barely 4 inches of movement, the motion of someone adjusting the volume on a device they control. Garrett stopped talking. Marcus looked at her. She looked at the car. He looked at Cora, who was watching everything with the patient attentiveness of a child, who has been to enough job sites to understand that adult conversations sometimes take a long time, and the best thing you can do is hold your toy and wait. He answered. The primary fuel pressure sensor on this model has a tolerance threshold that tightens when ambient temperature drops below roughly 54 degrees Fahrenheit, he said. His voice was even, unhurried, the voice of someone presenting a fact they have held for a while to someone who has just asked for it. Tonight is cold. We came down 14 degrees between 3 and 6 this afternoon. The vapor recovery solenoid is misfiring on its cycle sequence because the ECU is reading the pressure differential as a sensor calibration error rather than a mechanical condition. The official service documentation doesn't address that scenario because the field analysis that identified it was submitted to the Technical Review Board and never formally integrated into the service protocol. The silence that followed was not the silence of disbelief. It was the silence of a room in which a significant number of intelligent people have just understood something at the same moment. Elise looked at her tablet. At the bottom of her list, vapor recovery solenoid cycle sequence, ambient temperature correlation. She had written it there 2 hours and 17 minutes ago because the error code pattern had pointed to it, but she hadn't had enough field experience to be certain. She looked up. Garrett said, "That approach has already." "It hasn't," Elise said. She said it quietly, not as a challenge, just as an accurate statement. "It's not on the log." Peter Van Holt had not moved from his position near the wall. He was looking at Marcus Webb with the focused attention of a man who has just been reminded of something. He had the expression of a person retrieving a specific memory, and the retrieval was not entirely comfortable. Cora, who had been standing beside her father through all of this, looked at the Ferrari for a long moment. Then she lifted her toy car to eye level and tilted her head, comparing the two vehicles the way a child compares things when she wants to understand the relationship between them. She said very quietly, "That one doesn't have a roof either." Nobody laughed, but the tension in the room moved, just slightly, like a rope that had been pulled to breaking and then eased by a single degree. Margaret looked at Marcus. She said, "What do you need?" He thought for a moment. "A torque driver, T25 bit, and the solenoid bypass key from the Ferrari service kit if your technicians have one." 8 minutes, maybe less. Garrett opened his mouth. Margaret did not look at him. The security officer had already taken 2 quiet steps back toward the wall. Elise had already crossed to the technical station. She retrieved the tools and brought them to Marcus without being asked twice. He set his canvas bag down beside Cora's folding chair, which she had relocated with methodical precision to a position from which she could see both her father and the car. He took the tools and walked to the Ferrari and crouched beside the engine compartment. He did not perform. There is a specific quality to the work of someone who actually knows what they are doing, as opposed to someone demonstrating that they know what they are doing. The absence of theater, no dramatic pauses, no gestures calibrated for the observers. Just a person moving through a sequence of steps that exist completely inside their hands, the way certain knowledge lives in the body and not in the mind, the way you don't think about how to ride a bicycle. These were the same hands that had braided Cora's hair that morning at the kitchen table, with a comb between his teeth and a small jar of shea butter open beside the cutting board, because that was the spot with the best light. The same hands that had folded Denise's clothes into boxes 8 months ago because someone had to and there was no one else. Cora sat on her relocated chair. She held her toy car with both hands and watched. She had watched her father work on vehicles in 3 different cities, in a parking garage during a rainstorm in Raleigh, in a driveway in Greensboro in August heat, in a storage facility outside of Rock Hill on a Sunday morning when he had brought her along because he had nowhere else to take her. She had learned long ago that the best way to help was to be quiet and hold the thing she was holding. The first 2 minutes. Marcus placed his bare palm against the housing of the vapor recovery solenoid, not to check temperature, but to feel the pulse of it, the way it was cycling. He kept his hand there for 30 seconds. His eyes moved to a middle distance. Then his hand moved along the assembly toward the pressure differential sensor cluster. The 3rd minute. He removed 2 mounting fasteners from the sensor bracket and shifted the angle of the solenoid housing by approximately 4 degrees relative to the intake manifold axis. The adjustment was small enough that someone watching from a distance might have missed that anything had changed. One of the technicians who had spent the previous 4 hours kneeling over this car made a sound that was not quite a word. Another turned away. Not in embarrassment, exactly. In the specific discomfort of a competent person, realizing that the answer was in a place they had not looked. The 4th minute. Marcus located the bypass integration point, a narrow access behind the secondary fuel rail where the service manual suggested an endoscopic camera, not a hand. He used his hand. He made 3 specific adjustments in sequence, each one the result of something that did not come from documentation, but from having done this in a parking garage on a cold night in Raleigh 2 years ago, when a similar vehicle had presented a similar condition, and he had worked through it alone, with a borrowed flashlight and a set of hand tools that weren't quite right for the job. Elise was recording every movement on her tablet, not because anyone had asked her to, because she understood that what she was watching was not in any service manual that currently existed. The 5th minute. Marcus stood. He looked into the Dijon bay one final time, made no additional changes, and closed the hood with both hands. He stepped back. He looked at Margaret. He nodded once. Margaret crossed the floor to the driver's side. She had not sat in this car since the morning she took delivery of it, 6 months ago. A private appointment at the transport facility in Gastonia, just her and the car and the particular feeling she always got around machines built to perform at their absolute limit. She opened the door and sat down. The seat adjusted, the ambient cabin lighting came on. She pressed the ignition. 1 second. The Ferrari's engine started, not reluctantly, not with the coughing hesitation of a machine being coaxed back from the edge. It came to life the way this engine was engineered to, a deep and resonant note that seemed to rise from below the floor and pass through the legs of every person standing on the concrete. The kind of sound that is less heard than felt, less noise than presence. The room held its silence for 4 seconds. Then Peter Van Holt closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them he was smiling the very small smile of a man who has just seen something confirmed that he had suspected for some time. Cora held her toy car toward the ceiling. Margaret sat with the engine running. She felt the vibration through the seat. She let it run for 10 seconds, maybe 12. And she thought about what she had just watched, and she thought about what she had not watched for the years before tonight. There is something I want to say here, before we go any further. Something worth carrying into what comes next. The people we decide aren't worth our attention are not neutral in our lives. They are expensive. They are the ones carrying the answers we can't find. And the reason we can't find those answers is not because the answers don't exist. It is because we decided before we asked who was allowed to have them. The next time someone walks through a door in a work shirt and you feel the reflex of dismissal, I am asking you to pause. One breath. Long enough to ask the question Margaret asked, "What do you see? It costs nothing. It sometimes changes everything." Margaret turned the engine off. She stepped out. She stood beside the hood and looked at Marcus. Then she looked at Garrett. Her voice, when she spoke, was very quiet. The particular quiet that has the same effect as something much louder. "Garrett," she said, "how long have you known about this specific failure mode?" Elise had already found the file. She had flagged it 20 minutes ago, the moment Marcus walked into the hall, and she looked up his name in the contractor database and cross-referenced it against the technical submission archive. She had been waiting for this moment, with the particular patience of someone who knows the moment is coming and doesn't want to rush it. She read from her tablet without inflection, without drama, just a fact that deserved to be read aloud in the correct room. Internal field analysis, vapor recovery solenoid cycle behavior, ambient temperature correlation, submitted to the Radcliffe Motorsport Technical Review Board, March of 2020. Author, Marcus Webb. The room processed this at different speeds. Peter Van Holt looked at Garrett with an expression that was not surprise. It was the expression of a man who has just confirmed a thing he hoped was not true. Several of the technicians who had spent 4.5 hours around this car looked at each other and then at the floor. Marcus stood where he had been standing. He was not looking at the tablet. He was not looking at Garrett. He was looking at Cora, who had climbed off her chair and was walking the perimeter of the Ferrari at a respectful distance, her toy car extended slightly in front of her, as if introducing the two vehicles. Peter spoke. His English was careful, each word selected with the precision of a man who had learned the language as an adult and trusted precision, the way other people trusted instinct. He said, "I read that analysis. Our consortium received it as part of a joint technical review package in 2020. He paused. "The version I received had a different name on it. The version that had gone to the consortium under Garrett Stills's name, compiled from Marcus Webb's original submission with enough structural reordering to survive a casual comparison, had been the document that informed Crestfield's component procurement recommendations for the entire Monza service infrastructure. The document that made Garrett Stills the architect of Radcliffe's technical protocols. The document that had circulated through the industry press as evidence of his analytical capability. The document that had secured him 3 years of expanded authority within the company. The document that had appeared 4 months before the performance review that ended Marcus Webb's employment at Radcliffe. There is something that needs to be understood here because most people who haven't experienced it don't fully see what it is. When someone takes your analysis, your specific thought process, the hours you spent in a cold parking garage, working through a problem with the wrong tools because you cared enough to finish it, and puts their name on it, they do not only take the credit. They take the trail of evidence that you were ever there. The thing you made becomes proof of their intelligence, not yours. And if you try to say anything about it, you become the person who can't accept their own limitations. The person who is bitter. the person who blames others for their own failures. The cruelest mechanism in this kind of theft is that it produces exactly the evidence the thief would use against you. Your knowledge of the stolen work makes you look like someone desperately claiming credit for someone else's success. Marcus had not claimed anything. He had spent 3 years working contract jobs in cities that weren't where he wanted to be, raising a daughter who needed consistent pickup times and consistent dinners and consistent hair braiding on mornings when he had not slept enough, and he had not made the noise that would have made him look small. He had not called anyone. He had not sent any emails. He had taken his tools and his daughter, and he had gone to work. That kind of quiet is not resignation. It is a specific category of endurance that most rooms never have to develop and therefore do not know how to read. Garrett's face had done something over the last 90 seconds. He was a man who had been very good, for a very long time, at controlling the rooms he was in. He had a response for almost every configuration of conflict. He was standing in a configuration he had not prepared for. In a room where the car was running, where the file was open and sourced, where Pieter Van Holt was looking at him with the flat attention of a man who has already made his decision and is waiting for the meeting to end. Garrett had nothing. He stood near the edge of the display floor, with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at a point on the floor that did not contain anything useful. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. She said, "You walked into this room, into this company, with that history, and you fixed the car anyway." He looked briefly toward Cora, who was now crouching beside the front wheel of the Ferrari and examining the brake caliper with the focused interest of a child who has inherited a specific way of looking at mechanical things. "The car needed to be fixed," he said. "That part wasn't complicated." Margaret let that stay in the air for a moment. Then, "Stay." He looked at Cora. She had abandoned the wheel caliper and was now standing on her tiptoes trying to see over the sill of the driver's door. "I'll stay," he said. "But I'd like to get Cora settled first." Margaret looked at the girl for the first time directly. Cora turned from the car and looked back at her with the uncomplicated steadiness of a child who is perfectly comfortable being looked at because she has learned that she is not the kind of person who needs to shrink. "Of course," Margaret said. What followed in the hall over the next 40 minutes was not a confrontation. Margaret Holloway did not do confrontations on event floors. What followed was quieter than that and more permanent. Peter excused himself to make a phone call. He stood near the window with his back to the room and spoke in low, deliberate Dutch for 11 minutes. When he returned, his expression had the settled quality of a man who has handled what needed handling. Elise corrected every entry in the documentation log, adjusting the attribution of the evening's solution from ambiguous to specific, and then she went further back, flagging the 2020 submission and the 2020 internal routing records for formal review. And Garrett Stills stood at the edge of the display floor and understood, for the first time since the evening began, that there was nothing he could do to change the direction of what was happening. He had spent 20 years building a version of himself inside this company, and tonight, in the space of 8 minutes and a running engine, that version had been disassembled without any particular aggression. Just the accumulation of true things, stated plainly, in the right room. He went home at 9:14, before the signing, before the guests finished their final round of drinks. He did not say goodbye to anyone. Marcus had settled Cora on a bench in the back corridor with a soft roll from the catering station and a cup of apple juice that she held with both hands. He was crouched at her eye level, talking to her about something that had nothing to do with any of what had just happened. When Margaret appeared at the end of the corridor, Cora looked up and said, with the direct sociability of a 6-year-old who sees no reason not to be friendly, "Your jacket has really good buttons." Margaret looked down at her lapel buttons. "Silver, small, expensive," she said. "Thank you. I like your shoes." Cora considered this an acceptable exchange and returned to her role. Margaret sat in the chair beside the bench. She said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of this company." Marcus said nothing. "I also owe you a conversation about compensation." Tonight and for 3 years ago, he was quiet for a moment. "Then you can't pay for 3 years." Margaret looked at him. He said, "I'm not interested in a settlement for what happened then." I understand there are legal dimensions to it. But that's not the thing I want from you tonight. What do you want? He looked at Cora. She had finished half the roll and was now examining one of her light-up sneakers, pressing the sole against her palm to make the lights flash. I want the analysis corrected in the official record. The 2020 submission. I want my name on it, not because it changes what happened, but because the record should say what's true. That's all. Peter Van Holt had appeared at the corridor entrance without announcement. He stood there for a moment, and then he said, without introduction, I would like to propose that the agreement being signed tonight include a provision for a formal technical authorship audit. A review of all documentation submitted to either party's technical board over the past 6 years. Our consortium has recommended this standard for some time. I believe tonight provides the appropriate context. He looked at Margaret. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Elise, who had appeared behind Peter with her tablet, and the expression of someone who has been carrying useful information patiently for the last several hours and is relieved that it is finally needed. Elise said, The full documentation chain is already flagged. If we initiate the correction process tomorrow, the formal record update can be completed within 5 business days. Marcus stood from his crouch beside the bench. He reached down and adjusted one of Cora's braids where the elastic had slipped loose. She held still for this with the patient tolerance of someone who has come to accept that hair maintenance is a permanent feature of her existence. Then she went back to the sneaker lights. Margaret stood as well. She said, One more question. He waited. Are you still taking contract work? The question landed differently than he expected. He had anticipated an offer, something with a title and a salary range, and the formal vocabulary of corporate redemption. He had spent 3 years becoming practiced at politely declining things, and he had been preparing some version of that. This was a different kind of question. It wasn't offering him anything. It was asking what he was. For now, he said, I'd like to schedule a conversation, this week, if you're available. He looked at Cora. She had put down the sneaker and was holding her toy car up toward the corridor light, watching the way the Rosso Magma paint of the real Ferrari matched the red of her die-cast model, or didn't, depending on the angle. I'm available, he said, but the record correction happens before any meeting. That's not negotiable. Margaret held his gaze for a moment. She said, It will be filed by Wednesday. They did not shake hands. They looked at each other in the way that two people look at each other when they have just established the terms of something real, something that doesn't require ceremony to be binding. Cora lowered her toy car and looked at Margaret. Is the red car okay now? She asked. Your father made sure of it. Cora nodded with the satisfied air of someone who had never doubted this outcome. She went back to the light. Take a breath here, because the lesson in this part of the story is one of the easier ones to miss. Marcus did not ask for Garrett to be publicly dismissed. He did not ask for an apology on letterhead. He did not ask for money that could not carry the weight it would be asked to carry. He asked for one thing, his name, returned to the place where it had always belonged. Put back into the record, plainly, without ceremony, because the record should say what is true. There is something worth sitting with in that. Sometimes what was taken cannot be replaced with anything new. Sometimes the only thing that fits the shape of what was lost is the truth itself, given back without inflation. If you have been carrying something for a long time, without making much noise about it, you have not been passive. You have been doing one of the harder forms of endurance available. The kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside. The kind that gets mistaken, constantly, for absence. 4 days later, a Tuesday morning. The kitchen in Marcus's apartment in the Chantilly neighborhood of Charlotte. 2 windows with white curtains. A small table with a wobble in one leg that neither he nor Cora had bothered to fix in months. On the counter, a photograph of Denise taken at a beach in South Carolina the summer before Cora was born, her hand raised against the sun, laughing at something outside the frame. Marcus was at the stove making eggs. Cora sat on the tall stool at the counter, hair loose, because Tuesday was a school morning with no particular occasion, her toy Ferrari parked beside her glass of orange juice like a small red attendant. I'm thinking about changing jobs, he said. He didn't look away from the pan. She looked up from the counter. What kind of changing? A different place. A bigger place. I'd work on more cars. Would you still pick me up? She asked it with complete seriousness. This was not a small question for her. He knew that. He turned the heat down. Every day, he said, she thought about it. The way she thought about things that mattered, without hurrying. Do they have red cars? Probably, yeah. She looked at her toy. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she had been considering something for a while, nicer than Mama's car? Marcus moved the pan off the burner. He turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at his daughter. The morning light was coming through the white curtains and landing in her hair, which was loose and full and catching the light, the way it only did on mornings she let it breathe. Nothing's nicer than Mama's car, he said. You know that. Cora absorbed this. Her expression moved through several small adjustments and settled into something resolved. Okay, she said, then you should go. But you have to take me on weekends. He slid the eggs onto a plate and put it in front of her, and watched her arrange her fork and her toy Ferrari on either side of the plate with the spatial precision of someone who has very specific ideas about how her table should be organized. He picked up his phone. He typed a message to Elise Drummond, Tuesday, available after 9 a.m., looking forward to it. He typed one more line before sending. The record correction needs to be confirmed before we begin. That's the condition. He sent it and put the phone face down on the counter. Cora was eating her eggs. She had positioned her toy car so it faced the window, its wheels at the edge of the countertop, the red paint catching the morning light. The same shade as the car that had been sitting silent and dead in the Meridian Showcase Hall 4 days ago. The same shade as the car Denise had driven, a second-hand coupe with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat, where Cora had once drawn 3 horses in blue crayon on a Tuesday afternoon when the crayons were not supposed to be in the car. He looked at his daughter eating breakfast, and he thought about something that had no simple language for itself. The way certain things cannot be taken. Not really. They can be displaced. They can be buried under wrong names and bad years and early mornings in small kitchens. But they stay where they are, underneath all of it, patient, intact, waiting to be called back to the surface. That Wednesday, as promised, the formal record was corrected. The 2020 field analysis returned to its author's name. The Crestfield Consortium received official notification. Peter Van Holt's office sent a brief acknowledgement that said, in its entirety, the right name is on it now. That is how it should have been. Garrett Stills submitted his resignation the same day, by email, with no accompanying statement. HR sent a company-wide message about the restructuring of the engineering director role. Nobody in the building was confused about what had happened. Nobody said much about it. That was its own form of consequence, quieter than a firing, more permanent than a reprimand. The silence of a room that has revised its understanding of who someone was. Thursday morning. The building on West Trade Street where Radcliffe Motorsport occupied 3 floors had a lobby with high ceilings, and a floor that reflected the light in a way that seemed to have been planned by someone with a specific agenda. Marcus wore a collared shirt, dark trousers, and the leather boots that had been with him for a long time. He had left Cora at the school, 3 blocks from the apartment, hair freshly braided with the orange elastics, because it was a school day and school days had standards. Elise met him at the elevator. The filing went through yesterday afternoon, she said as they rose. The document is corrected in the official record. The consortium confirmed receipt this morning. Peter's office sent a note. She glanced at the tablet. I'm quoting directly. The right name is on it now. That is how it should have been. Marcus nodded. She said, Garrett resigned yesterday. HR sent an email. The director role is being restructured. She paused. That's accurate. He looked at the elevator doors. Are you all right? She asked. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, specifically, without reaching for the comfortable answer first. I'm fine, he said. Some things take the time they take. The conference room had windows facing east, and a table long enough that the far end caught different light than the near end. Margaret was already there, standing at the window, looking at the city the way certain people look at things they feel responsible for. She turned when he entered. On the table, 2 documents. One was a single page, the corrected 2020 submission, his name in the author field, the original submission date beside it. The other was a contract several pages long with a title that he read once, and then looked at the wall because reading it twice felt too close to wanting something. Margaret said, "I can't give back 3 years," he said. "I know. I can give you what comes after them." She indicated the chair across from her. He sat. He picked up the single page first. Marcus Webb. Author. March 2020. The document that had started as a solution to a problem no one else had thought to look for, that had been taken, that had been used to build someone else's reputation, that had been filed under the wrong name for 3 years while the right name worked contract jobs in parking garages. It was back where it belonged. That was what he had asked for, and that was what was in his hands. He set it down carefully. He read the contract. All the way through without skimming, the way he read things. He asked 3 questions. Margaret answered all 3 directly. He signed it. He looked at her across the table. She said, "Welcome." He thought about the way Cora had asked, on Sunday morning, "Would you still pick me up every day?" He thought about the question and what it contained, all 9 words of it. The whole of what mattered compressed into something small enough to ask over breakfast. He thought about a car built to go 200 miles an hour, sitting silent, in a room full of people who were very smart and looking in the wrong place. He thought about a document with the wrong name on it sitting in a filing system for 3 years. Some things wait, he thought. They do not become less true while they are waiting. They sit where they are, and they are patient, and when the right room opens, they are exactly what they always were, unchanged, intact, exactly as true as the morning they were made. He picked up the corrected document. He folded it along the center. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where he would feel it when he moved. Then he stood. He shook her hand. He walked out through the building with its high lobby and its reflective floor, and through the glass doors, and into the ordinary bright morning of West Trade Street. Cora was at the school window when he arrived that afternoon. She saw him through the glass before he came through the door. She always did. It was a specific fact about her, one he had never mentioned to anyone, that she was always the first to spot him in any crowd, any parking lot, any school window, any doorway. She came through the door talking. "Did you go to the new place?" "I did." "Did they have red cars?" "A lot of them." She considered this for a moment, holding her toy Ferrari against her chest. "Same red as mine?" He looked at the small die-cast car in her hands. The same shade, more or less, as the car he had started in a hall 4 days ago. The same shade, roughly, as the car Denise had driven, the one with the blue crayon horses on the passenger seat. "Same red as yours," he said. She looked at the toy. She looked at him, and she smiled, the way she smiled, when something was like it was supposed to be. The way she had smiled the first morning she figured out how the lights in her sneakers worked. The way she smiled when he got home exactly when he said he would. Marcus Webb put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and they walked home through the Thursday afternoon, the toy car in her jacket pocket, the corrected document folded against his chest, the city moving around them, with the ordinary indifference of cities, full of engines and problems and people who know where to look when no one else can find the answer. And here is where I want to leave you. Not with something loud, not with a lesson delivered at volume, just this. The people the world decides aren't worth noticing are not passive in their absence. They are somewhere building the thing that will eventually be needed. They are raising a child and making breakfast and braiding hair and doing work that will not be credited and carrying what cannot be put down, and they are doing all of it without making a sound about it. Because making a sound would cost something they can't afford to spend. Marcus Webb did not win by destroying anyone. He won by remaining, through 3 years of wrong names and contract work and early mornings in a small kitchen, exactly who he was. Patient, precise, undiminished. Garrett Stills did not lose because someone fought him. He lost because the truth is not a fair fighter. It does not compete. It simply exists, intact, underneath everything that has been piled on top of it, and when the right room opens, it is still there, still accurate, still exactly what it was the day it was made. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever name has been moved, whatever room has not yet thought to ask what you see, your steadiness is being recorded. By a child, by yourself, by the specific quality of the work you continue to do in the absence of recognition. The right rooms tend to find people who have learned to remain whole inside themselves, even when no one is watching. And when those rooms open, the work you have been doing quietly all along turns out to be exactly what was needed. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to discover who they really were? Share your story below. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hidden depths, hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next one.